Everybody, and welcome to Practicing Catholic. Today we are joined by Anthony D'Ambrosio, the writer and director of Triumph of the Heart.
I didn't tell the story because I was like, oh, I want to make a movie about Maximilian Kolbe. Frankly, for me, it was a way of dialoguing with the questions that I had about how could a good God allow this kind of evil to happen in this world.
Beauty here is wrapped up in a bunch of men starving to death in a cell.
Catholicism doesn't take like Christ off the cross in our core symbol. Like if you think about what the brand of the Catholic Church is, it's the crucifix.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Practicing Catholic, where we discuss the often arduous but always fruitful practice of holiness in everyday life. This is a great milestone for us on Practicing Catholic. We have our first guest with Anthony D'Ambrosio. I am Taylor Kemp, and with me
Dr.
is
Scott Hefelfinger. I'll say my name.
Dr. Scott Hefelfinger. Perfect. We have our first guest, which is Anthony D'Ambrosio. Anthony is joining us from Denver, Colorado, where he has not spent too much of his time lately. He's been doing other things. He is the director and writer of a great new film called Triumph of the Heart on Maximilian Kolbe. That film, everybody, is in theaters right now. So please check the link in the description to buy your tickets, tell your friends, and you are going to hear a lot about it today on this episode. So Anthony, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So today's episode, we want to talk about art and story, because it's something that has been present in the life of the church for a long time, but especially because we have you here. We want to talk about, why does art matter? Why should we tell stories? Why should we tell good stories? How do we do that? So to tee you up to that end, Anthony, you've been working on this film now for years. We got some time with you. You've been thinking about and writing this film for even more years than you've been producing it. So I guess, why did you do this project? Why did you do it in the way that you did? Help us get to where we are now on right on the heels of the theatrical release.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for this topic. It's something that I really think that is so important for this moment in history, in the history of our church. I think that as a church right now, there's something in the air that it feels like we're sort of waking up to our historic identity, to a call to be the salt of the earth. And our greatest pride, like the jewel that we have to offer the world, is, of course, the Gospels, but the Gospels as they are kind of ensconced or encapsulated in our art and our sacred tradition. Of course, like our liturgy is soaked in art, and historically we've been the most ourselves when we've been a culture of artists. And so part of why I made this film is because I've had sort of a burning zeal in my life to help the church to reclaim that, I guess, that pride of place, if that makes sense. And so there's a lot more that I could say about like how I got here and kind of the story in terms of where it started and where I arrived. But there is certainly a thread that I think starts when I was maybe 6 years old and had experienced my first like Saint comic book and realized like, oh, these stories are like absolutely badass and amazing. And I would love to, I just had an immediate desire to help to tell them and kind of play them out, as kids often do. And then, frankly, was really disappointed and let down by lots of like saint stories that I'd read and heard, and had this kind of burning zeal to like, I think that we could do better, so yeah.
Why do you, so you said at the beginning, you think this is like a good moment in which the church kind of needs, why do you think that, what do you mean by that?
Well, the last, I think, I don't even know where to sort of put the point of beginning, but there's been something about the last age of the church that was very focused on apologetics. And of course, like the intellect is really important to be formed in order to be able to fully be shaped in the soul. But I think that there's a sort of obsession that we've had as a culture for right belief and right thinking. And that's not to down that. Of course, that's very important. But I don't think that the normal way that God speaks to his people and converts their hearts is through the intellect. That tends to be, I think, a more select group of people who are able to sort of capture the mind and to be able to really understand more of the lofty ideas. But the church has always really spoken in the vernacular in a way and has understood that those who are literary are not going to be kind of the general public. And so how to get to them is through the smells and the bells and the symbols and the sort of the I guess, rituals that offer both belonging and an experience of the story that makes it palpable and material and sort of present in somebody's everyday life. And so I think there's a movement back to that in liturgy. There's a movement back to that in storytelling and in culture. I think there's this huge explosion of like the Catholic maker space where more products and more art and more like things in people's homes are sort of becoming not these like cheesy old like plastic versions of Catholic objects, but are now like really beautifully well-made things, like from rosaries to socks to kids' pajamas to, whatever you could possibly think of. There's some sort of maker out there that's like made some like amazingly beautiful, heartfelt kind of cultural thing that allows us to create the domestic church in our own homes. And I think that is a really good sign of what is to come, what is happening right now in our culture as we're sort of rediscovering that like more rich and tasty version of Catholicism that perhaps was like lost.
I was just thinking about the comment that the way that Catholics have encountered the faith by and large has not been through formal education, right? This kind of particular formation of the intellect, and instead has been through artwork. And I had this dawned on me. I was in Rome one time, and I walked into now I'm forgetting the name, the Pope's Basilica, St. John Lateran. There it is, and I was caught up in the architecture and the sacred art and the way that it was kind of organized in the church. And I was studying theology at the time, and I kind of like swept my eyes across the whole thing, and I just thought to myself, that's incredible. If somebody were to be confronted by this time and time again, and to meditate on it, and really kind of understand what's going on through the art, in the art, they could have like a degree in theology. Like that's how much art can convey. And now, this was kind of in stone and some of the visual arts, and then we're here in the context of filmmaking, so there are these other avenues as well. But I think it's definitely true that there's a need for this type of expression.
Yep. Yeah, and they're both good ways in, right? Like, we had a Dominican friend, a priest who's studying to get his doctorate, and he was actually just talking to me. He's like, "What's the relationship between truth and beauty?" And he gave the best, just like Dominicans would. He gave the best explanation, but he's like, "Well, they're kind of both ways in, right? You can study the Trinity, and the longer you study the Trinity, which is the mystery of the faith." Because he's doing this, and he's like, the longer I've studied the Trinity, which began with an intellectual sense, the more I came to realize how beautiful the Trinity is. Like that, but it was first like I had to see all the parts, and then when you see the harmony of them, it was really beautiful. And he said, but then for so many people, it's the other way, which is you hear a gospel story, like one of the simple parables, or you see a great piece of art, or you see something etched in stone, and it's just like. And it just like, and then you come to say like, I have to know more about that. And I was like, oh, that is beautiful. At least it was for me because I love the Dominicans. So Anthony, that makes sense. There's a moment that this is for, there's a real need. So let's talk a little bit more specifically why this story, why Kolbe?
What is the story?
Tell us
about this film.
Yeah. Okay. So, for people who don't know the story of St. Maximilian Kolbe, some of the major beats that are important to understand are, one, this was perhaps the first Mother Angelica or Bishop Barron of the church. She was the first sort of media conglomerate to use mass media to create an evangelical like outreach to culture. with, of course, like the radio and newspaper and magazines and sort of everything that was available to them at the time technologically to be able to really mass produce and distribute media. And he was incredibly successful and entrepreneurial with that, had the largest reach, had the largest friary in Europe and I think even in the world at the time. But when the Nazis invaded Poland, he was rounded up as a part of the sort of gathering of all the intellectual elite of Poland at the time that was not going to be friendly to the Reich, and was brought to Auschwitz for dehumanization and extermination. And when he was in Auschwitz, one of the punishments and psychological tortures that they created was that if anybody went missing or escaped, they would take 10 men or women to die out of that person's sort of bunkhouse, if you will. And so this was happening in one of these dreaded lineups where 10 people were being pulled out to starve to death in this like horribly gruesome death. Kolbe heard another man in great desperation crying out, "Don't pick me, please. I've got wife. I've got children." And Kolbe stepped out of line, which should have got him shot, and said, "Let me take his place. I'm a Catholic priest." And the German commandant miraculously didn't shoot him, but actually accepted the trade and let him take this man's place. Which I think many people know that beat of the story. That's perhaps the most famous part. But what I think is really, really interesting and what really captivated me beyond that was I realized that I learned later on that Kolbe was not alone in his death. I knew that he was obviously in the cell with other people, but for some reason, I think these other people sort of just immediately began to fade out of the story. But to realize that he was a pastor, a priest in this dark moment for 9 other men who just had their whole lives just immediately taken from them, who all had beautiful and important and meaningful stories just like any one of us, and that they had to then face their deaths in this like meaningless, gruesome, terrifying way. They had to walk down the hall in the basement of this prison bunker. If anybody's been to Auschwitz and has seen this, this is this sort of this building where all of the science experiments were happening at the time. Like people were being gassed as an experiment to see what's the right ratio of Cyclone B gas to, save money but kill the most people, right? Like these are the sorts of things that are happening in this place as these men are being marched down the hall and thrown into this cell. And Kolbe was able to, one, we know that he sang and was praying from the center of the cell, and that over time the other prisoners came to that sort of huddle with him, that they were found huddling together, holding each other, singing songs, praying the rosary, and that they stayed alive for 14 days without food or water, and that there was 3 other men that also survived long enough to have to be executed by the Nazis with him. And so when I saw that, I realized that, particularly from my own vantage point as somebody who was in a moment of great suffering in my own life, that there was something Kolbe did that was like a miracle of hope and of love that was being conveyed, that as a pastor, he wasn't just saving this man's life, but he was undergoing this like rescue mission where he was entering into the hell of these other men, descending into hell the way Christ descended into hell, and was like sort of shouldering their suffering to sort of carry them out of that into heaven with him. And when I saw that, like the love that was like burning in him, and the love that I saw him have for these other people was like the most credible vision of what the priesthood is. It was like an icon of Jesus Christ in our modern world, and it ministered to me in a way that really helped me to sort of come back to my own faith. And so I knew I didn't tell the story because I was like, oh, I want to make a movie about Maximilian Kolbe. Frankly, for me, it was a way of dialoguing with the questions that I had about how could a good God allow this kind of evil to happen in this world? What is the point of life if it's going to continue being like suffering and there's not hope for like a release from that? Frankly, these sort of like pro-life questions in a way, like if somebody is going to die anyway, and what's the point of living? And I was sick at the time, so and I had no diagnosis for like how I would get better, and that question was very urgent to me. So I was meditating on that and writing the script kind of out of this personal desire to like find some hope for myself if there was any to be found.
How did it find its way into a script? That was beautiful and it totally makes sense. How did it get into a script form? Was that something you were like, how did it end up as a script rather than in like a prayer journal?
Yeah, but it started in a prayer journal, and it started as like a dialogue between myself as a prisoner and Kolbe, and that was like a Lectio Divina, like exercise. It didn't become a script until I was working for the Diocese of Dallas as a consultant and kind of media person that was helping them with an outreach to campus to a place in Dallas. We were trying to create an event that would reach out to people who had been de-churched, who had left the church, and we had decided to make this South by Southwest type like arts event that had speaker, but also like spoken word poetry and music and maybe some film that would all be tied together by the theme of doubt and of grief. And we identified that as like, this is when people leave the church, oftentimes it's not because of these big hot button topics that are the political like catalysts. It's actually moments in their lives where they feel like they can't discuss something in the context of faith because it's too hard. And a lot, like study after study was coming out at the time that was sort of showing this, and it was like, okay, let's do something that really directly hits this on the head and opens up conversation that people could not have in a church. And that was the moment where I was like, I've been thinking about Kolbe for this long time, and I could see a whole 12 Angry Men style like dialogue of what's happening inside of the cell when Kolbe's talking to these other men who are not in any way entertaining his his piety. Like, what does he do in that situation if he's the holdout and everybody else is like, let's kill ourselves right now and get this over with? And that began to sort of give it a structure. And when we shot that and showed it, it was like an atomic bomb spiritually went off in this place. There were like lines out the door for people to go to confession.
Wow.
Everybody was like, weeping. And this was just like the small budget short film, but we knew that we had sort of like struck a vein. There was like some sort of like hitting oil moment of like the Holy Spirit being like volcanically
dig
erupting.
there, like there's something
Yeah,
there.
exactly. And we're like, we should keep digging, and that's what led to the bigger script.
When you're talking, I was just thinking of John Paul II's letter to artists. Emily, could you look that up? There's the dedication on that at the very, very beginning.
I got it.
Do you have that line?
To all who are passionately dedicated to the search for new epiphanies of beauty, so that through their creative work as artists, they may offer these as gifts to the world.
Yeah, I know. New epiphanies of beauty. When you were telling the story, I was just kind of like, from your own particular hardship, but the story of, to have the insight to see the story of Maximilian Kolbe in this new way, a kind of epiphany. And then just as John Paul II said, to share that as a gift to the world. I think that's amazing. But there's an interesting thing here, right? Epiphanies of beauty. And we talk so much about the way of beauty, and art and beauty. And it's true. But what I think is really kind of provocative is your contribution of beauty with this film, which is going to be amazing, is actually to take a very ugly scene, right? Beauty here is wrapped up in a bunch of men starving to death in a cell. How do we think about that? Like when sometimes the way of beauty can sound so romanticized,
right?
But there is something, in this really grisly, gruesome moment that still is beautiful, and you found it in a way beautiful and consoling. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I love Catholicism and what sort of brought my heart back to being open to the faith was that Catholicism doesn't take like Christ off the cross in our core symbol. Like if you think about what the brand of the Catholic Church is, it's the crucifix. It's not the empty cross. That's one of the unique things about us, right? And I think that what Christ in his like strange paradoxical message to us has been this exaltation of humanity on the cross, like naked, defiled, but also like beautifully vulnerable and redeemed. Like that's the measure of God's love for us is his willingness to be with us in our suffering. And I think that Maximilian Kolbe's story is like a rhyme with the story of Christ. And that's what every Christian story should be, right? But you have this like incredibly poignant, almost icon of Christ in Kolbe because the pattern of their lives is very similar here. Like, you know, unjustly imprisoned and put to death, and doing so sort of to take the place of another person, but also to sort of be with us in our own suffering. And so, yeah, I think that beauty, as the Catholic imagination has presented it in the course of our history, has always had this weird, like almost like dark edge to it that in modern Christianity that's been very much like formed and shaped in sort of the Puritan and evangelical tradition has lost. Like we're very sensitive here in the US as an audience, and we're not used to the actual full kind of brunt and force of Catholic sacred tradition. Like it's part of the maturing process that I feel like is happening right now as we're like waking up to who we are. But I would say that, you know, if you go to Europe, I mean, particularly in Poland, like you would be shocked at like the gruesomeness and intensity of the art that is just hanging on a wall when you walk into like their, you know, a university there or something, like the Pieta just sort of holding Christ in a really broken, like presenting suffering, like just right there. And I think that the reason why that's so important is because that's real. Like if we try to present a saccharine beauty that is almost like forced to be aesthetically beautiful, but doesn't allow for the evil and darkness and pain of the world to kind of break into the image. I think people who experience that suffering, they don't find a place for that in their worldview, and they leave.
And everyone will.
Right.
Everybody will face trials and sufferings of one degree or another.
Yeah. And I think that part of the exodus that's happening right now in like American Christianity is that it's the encounter with things that don't make sense, a mystery that wasn't able to be sort of symbolically wrapped up and contained in the evangelical like aesthetic and the Puritan aesthetic. And you actually see people taking refuge now in older rites of faith, you know, Orthodoxy and Anglicanism and Catholicism, because I think our sacred tradition actually has a space for that kind of suffering and ugliness, even in our claim that God redeems it and makes it beautiful.
Yeah, it can have meaning, which like, you know, it's like, do we want to be able to have a religion that has a home for when things are great? Like, of course we do, right? But like, it's the moments when things are hard, which life is hard. Like we all will face challenges of one degree or another. And if it's like, if one's worldview, if one's religion cannot speak, then it cannot speak. Like it, and so, yeah, I think that was really
I really like part of what I would say to that too is like Christ says, pick up your cross and follow me. And that might sound really nice and heroic, but when you're actually on the cross, the thing that you do not want to do is have a light show and sing worship songs. Like that's just not enough, right? Like it emotionally feels forced. And I think that part of what all of us are realizing is we're like seeking these deeper, more symbolic experiences of liturgy and incense is like an embracing of the full mystery of the human heart that is encapsulated both in like the weird kind of atonal sort of songs and chants and things that are not, that don't make sense, that aren't obvious, that don't just like linearly speak to you in your mind. So, yeah.
Just to sort of change tracks, but it's a subset, a small subset of this theme. And on this podcast, we like to talk about work, because it's so much of the world that we're wrapped up in.
Do a lot of that.
And there's a way that I think for Catholic creatives in particular, we think about, the project of beauty and kind of the romantic notion of like, go out and create something. And, that's all like real and it can be super inspiring, right? But there is a little evil, a little cross always, and that's of toil in the work, right? And I know we've had several conversations over the last little while here, and with both your love and your enthusiasm for the project has come through to me, but also that real sense of like, we're toiling. What would you say to a Catholic who's like in the trenches, is just kind of coming face to face with the reality that every job has parts of it that you're like, that is not my favorite part, or that is really toilsome. What has gotten you through like some of those moments, and what would you say to someone who's just like bumping up against that, maybe almost for the first time in a job?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I'm actually like a pansy when it comes to doing things that I don't like for work. I'm a classic millennial that just sort of meets an obstacle and wants to just like wither in front of it and go and scroll. So obviously I've had to overcome that. And I think that part of it for me is that I have to do this or I will die. Like it feels like that urgent, and I can't explain how that is. But I've done plenty of other things in my life that were not that urgent and where I didn't have the motivation that got me to do the hard thing. But I guess I would say part of this is that the desire to meet God in your work, I think has to really be there to do big things. And for me, I think that willpower is some people have great, strong willpower. I do not have that. That's not my gift. I'm Italian and sort of have this like very like sensitive kind of soul, but I wish that I was a little bit more German and, woke up every morning at exactly the right time and just like had 2 cups of coffee and just ground everything down. But I think that for me, the way that I've gotten through it has really been love, like the way that a parent falls in love with their child and is willing to wake up at every hour of the night and, be inconvenienced at every moment of the day in order to see that child come to maturity. And for me, I love the people that I'm working with, and I love the mission so deeply that I don't mind like having 2 hours of sleep and then like doing my Polish interviews and then being like, now's my American day, like I think that there's just sort of a very close comparison to the work of like giving yourself completely to something that actually makes you feel alive. And I would say that this has been like the most happy I've been despite how freaking hard it has been to do.
St. Francis of Sales has a great line that's to the effect of, love makes all things sweet. And it's so true,
even
right?
in the midst of
like the hardest things don't cease being hard, but love somehow can make that hard work sweet.
Yeah, your yoke is easy, your burden is light. It's not like your yoke is not a yoke, your burden is not a burden. The promise is that you will have both a yoke and a burden, but that somehow they will feel light to you. And that is certainly what it has been like for me, that somehow there's just this unending energy to like dig a little bit deeper for like one more day. And I think really like leaning into that motivation is part of how I've done it, is to like having the prayer time, praying with the team, not like missing the moments to actually share on a personal level, like, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to you? Why are we doing this together? Like those are the sort of places where we're drawing that motivation from, drawing from the wellspring of love.
Yep. It's beautiful. And everybody, by way of reminder, this movie, Triumph of the Heart, is in theaters now. You can follow the link in the description to go buy tickets, tell your friends, go see it. So I want to turn, Anthony and Scott, to our audience questions. We are always happy to hear those. Emily, what do you have for us?
Wonderful. My first question has to do with kind of this like gruesome, tragic art that we sometimes see in the church. I think for a lot of people, we kind of become desensitized to what it's really trying to communicate to us. So how would you guys recommend we go about like entering into that art again and trying to experience what it's trying to communicate?
I mean, I don't know if everybody, that's an amazingly mature question. I don't know if everybody wants to enter back into that mystery. But I think like the first thing that came to my mind was just like, go and look at some Polish art. You know?
Go to Poland.
Go to Poland on pilgrimage or something. But I think even deeper than that, I guess it's a willingness to really look at your own experiences of suffering and to recall them and seek God in them. I mean, not everybody is experiencing like great suffering in the moment, so it's not always, it's not like, oh, you have to find the doorway to God's like speaking to you in your heart through that right now. That might not be the way that God is trying to speak to you. But if you are in a place of suffering, then I think being willing to like really look at the cross and like meditate on it, look at like the Pietà and just make a moment in your prayer time to actually sit with actual art that was made or listen to something that was written for a requiem, and to use this art to enrich your prayer, so that your meditation is sort of brought forward on the wings of the work that other artists and the church and its tradition has already done to help you to kind of process these experiences.
Yeah. And I was similar to that. My first thought was kind of like, it's also, as you said, it's okay to be in different seasons,
right?
Really, because like Christ's life, he has great moments. He has lonely moments. He has suffering. So, you know, it's like, at least for myself, it's like when times have been very hard, it's much easier to look at Christ on the cross and it bears fruit, because you're like, I feel that. And then there's moments where like, you know, Christ is asleep in the boat, or you're listening to his teaching. And so it is okay, like to Anthony's point, to let one be in one season. And it's a gift that we have all the range of human experience is found in the life of Christ, and to find him in one's season of life. And it's, of course, always good to try to draw that out, especially when one is in the season of Lent. But it's okay to also kind of be where you are.
Yeah, and I was thinking similarly. It seems like you can come at it from two ways. Like when Anthony said, like that's a very mature question. I think most people come in from the other direction, which is like you experience some suffering, and then you have this realization about the cross.
Yeah.
But if the questioner is kind of more like, it's hard to understand why we have such gruesome depictions. If it's a little more of an apologetic kind of bent, then I can see how, you know, there's a way that it's hard to appreciate that character if we don't appreciate the reality and gruesomeness of sin. So if we're finding it difficult to look at the cross, I think that's okay at some level, right? There are certain seasons, there's a kind of maturity question. But if one is feeling, that you need an answer to that question, I think it begins with, that was like the real cost because of how bad sin is. So that might be coming at it from the other angle.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
If, we have another moment to kind of reflect. So I'm a 12-step guy, and actually quite a few people who are in the cast and crew were also recovering addicts in the 12-step world. And one of the really amazing insights of the process of spiritual growth that is sort of laid out in the 12 steps is that it kind of accepts that addicts have this self-willed, self-protective amnesia, that we cannot remember the consequences of our sin because it's too much for us to bear. And it's if we really did fully remember that, we would sort of fall into this like pit of despair. And actually one of the things that they're trying to do is to make you rediscover your own helplessness, come out of denial and actually see, wow, like I have brutally hurt the people in my life. I have like betrayed everything that I believe in, and I have no power to change myself on my own. And that, if you get to that point, then you have two options. One is to hide again in your addiction and to like cover it back up because you can't bear it. Or on the other hand, to reach out to God, to a higher power that could save you. And I think that maybe your experience of the season of life that you're in is not the moment right now to sort of focus on suffering and things like that. But it's a universal need, I think, of the human soul to reconnect with its own desperation for God. And the examination of conscience can actually really do that. And that's part of what I think being on the cross, or the reflection on the cross, is that I, by my own willpower, cannot escape the fact that I am helpless to sort of the wounds of my life, to the sin of my life, and I need desperately God to sort of save me from that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you went to that other point, because, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And this isn't to minimize that, but to universalize it, which is, I think a lot of us don't take the time to realize, or maybe just don't realize, that to be Christian means to acknowledge our utter helplessness to get to heaven apart from Christ.
Right.
So to have that experience of, in a way, hopelessness before one meets Christ, so to speak, that's the precondition for Christian hope.
Right.
So, it's a critical human and Christian experience to realize the kind of depths of sin and our helplessness in that way.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. This next question, shifting gears a little bit, we've been talking about Catholic film. How do we balance the timelessness of the tradition of Catholic art and beauty with modern technology?
Oh.
Yeah, it's a great one. So many moments of like Renaissance in the church have come when the church has embraced a new sort of technology for the telling of the gospel. You think like stained glass was actually a revolution at one point, right? Like, and the use of eggshells to create the paint that could last forever on frescoes, that was a new technology that the church used to create its sort of, I think, I really see these things as a cathedral, for instance, is almost like a alternate reality that we're helping people to step into that's immersive, like VR, right? And I think that the church has always had this both like reflexive instinct to abdicate new technology for telling the gospel, and also at the same time some weird wacky people that kind of embrace it and show, oh, we can use this too, and then that becomes like the new norm. I mean, St. Maximilian Kolbe was like one of these people, actually. Yep. When right now, like the first people that were making movies was like Hollywood and communists and Nazis, right? It was like propaganda. And Kolbe saw, I think we should make like a film studio. And obviously his life was cut short before he could actually accomplish that vision. But I think there's always these sort of like saintly or savant type people that see a power for creating an immersive experience into the story of the gospel with a new technology that is secular. So I think that film is actually kind of like on its way out as a new sort of thing to tell the story of the gospel, and there's a lot more kind of coming next. But I think that film is a really great and important place for us to start. And right now, I think there's a new renaissance that's taking place in that medium.
That's great.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Nothing to add.
That's all the questions that I have for you guys today.
Alrighty. Again, everybody, Triumph of the Heart is in theaters right now, so go buy your tickets, link in the description. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to have another episode as well to talk even more. So more to come on that. Any parting comments?
Well, I think there's
thoughts?
an easy personal challenge for the week.
What
That
is yours?
watch the film.
I'm going to watch the film
That's mine
too.
too.
And I'm
Yeah,
excited about it.
I don't know why I didn't think of saying like use my film to sort of get, as your window into the mystery of suffering. That would be a really first thing that you should try and do if you're interested in this question. Yeah. So
Great to chat with you,
Yeah.
Anthony. Really appreciate it.
It's a great privilege, and thank you for all your work, for all the crew out there. It's great things. We care deeply about bringing, communicating the gospel in new ways through sacred things, through sacred art. So beautiful, beautiful thing. We'll be praying for the film. Thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone out there for joining us on Practice Catholic. We will see you next time. God bless.